The other suggested idea for communicating climate change science, of course, the stories and metaphors, which are things like saying we have our hands on the thermostat that controls future climate. Okay, there's really no thermostat, and it's not something we can just change with one quick move, but nonetheless, we are basically affecting all the processes that affect the evolution of future climates. So this is a strong metaphor saying we have the control on the thermostat, so we better watch it carefully, right? And there are books like this, Chip and Dan Heath, which who I mentioned in the context of their book Switch, How to Make Change When Change is Difficult or some such thing. I love that book as well. And these are tricks on how to make the message stick and why some ideas survive and others die. Okay, so this is critical as well. The other one that is kind of easy to explain in terms of why climate change affects things and not always as obvious as we think. For example, we always say climate extremes, weather events will get more powerful and more frequent in a warmer climate. So when it gets minus 50 degrees in the winter in Washington, and it gets 60 degrees temperature in the winter in Alaska, people in Alaska will say, wow, that's really warm. But people in DC, especially some politicians, brought snowballs into the Congress and said, where is global warming? That is kind of a strong messaging by a politician, and it catches quickly with people. So global warming can make strong winter storms. This is what is not so easy to explain. So the analogy suggested in the book is that of some controversy that exploded in baseball, which is a favorite pastime in the US, where several players started hitting lots of home runs, which is like a sixer in our cricket. You hit it out of the park, and then you can go all the way around. Nobody can get you out, right? It's just like sixer means you got 6 runs, you don't have to run. Okay, so the question was, is the steroid and the drug abuse by the player making him hit more home runs? Of course, and there is the example of Lance Armstrong, who won some seven bicycle rides, the French, what is it called? I already forgot. But these are players who are good, and they would hit home runs anyway, and Lance Armstrong was good enough as a bike rider to win the competition anyways. But the steroids increase the probability of home runs, or increase the probability of winning the bike race for Lance Armstrong. You can think of carbon dioxide as the steroid of our climate. Increasing carbon dioxide in climate increases the chances of naturally occurring events like strong snowstorms, cold waves, heat waves, extreme rainfall, etc. Intensity of hurricanes. That's what I explained before as the loaded die. So a die that is not loaded should throw this equal probability of different numbers, but if you load it, you can make it throw certain numbers more often, right? That's what carbon dioxide and the associated activities like deforestation, urbanization begin to do. They begin to increase the probability of, let's say, a flood that occurs every 20 years to now occur at every 10 years or every 5 years, and so on. So that's a metaphor. CO2 is like a steroid of climate. Okay. Here, we climate scientists are planetary physicians. That's another metaphor. We can diagnose what's wrong with the planet and advise or recommend things. Okay, it's like a doctor advising you to stop smoking or exercise more or reduce sleepless nights, whatever. Decisions about caring for a or patient and the earth will be made by its people and their governments. Climate science communicators must inform people and motivate them to act promptly, wisely, and forcefully. This is from a paper by Hans Schellnhuber, which talked about um, sustainability analysis for earth science or something like that. This is a wood carving from the 15th century that talks about shock of discovery, let's say, of earth being in a heliocentric universe and not in a geocentric universe. And the analogy he uses is a second Copernican revolution, where under Copernican revolutions telescope, microscope were being invented. People were focusing on individual discoveries, individual achievements, whereas now we are sending out satellites and looking inward instead of using a telescope and looking outward, and we are doing what is called big science in a pejorative way by some people, where IPCC, for example, has hundreds and even thousands of people involved in producing the report. Okay. I put in here a couple of other points. Medical science is not always debated by having an opposing view. Every time you see a climate change debate, often they have a contrarian sitting there with four scientists, and this contrarian, who's not even a climate scientist or has some climate credibility, like some insiders of climate business who are always arguing that climate change is not real. So that's kind of a false equivalence. When 97% of the climate change scientists agree on something, to have one person who is opposing everything without solid scientific evidence can be a false equivalence. And then there is ways we ourselves ingest information and perceive risks. In the 20s and maybe 30s, there were ads like this. Well, this is much later. Ronald Reagan, maybe 40s, where he's advertising for Chesterfield, but more shockingly, more than 20,000 physicians say Luckies are less irritating. So it was considered cool to say even more doctors smoke, but cigarette companies used that to say actually smoking doesn't cause any problems. So misinformation was spread. Same thing is happening with climate change. Okay, so the concept of certainty trough can be helpful there, which was introduced by McKenzie in 1990, where let's say you are producing some information about future of climate change projections, okay, or climate change projections for the future. The people who actually do the work have some sense of uncertainty. They can quantify it. They have good handle on it because they are directly involved in the knowledge production. But then as your social distance to knowledge producers increases, those committed to institutional and research program but users or managers rather than knowledge producers, so people who have to make policy decisions or investments for companies, investments in green technology and so on, may take that information on climate projections and say we must do this because this is what science says. So they produce this certainty trough where they underrepresent the uncertainty in the information that the knowledge producers actually know. This is also called the uncertainty well in sometimes. And those who are far away from the knowledge producers in a social distance sense, they are alienated from research program and those institutions that are using this information. They will feel that the uncertainty is very high, which may lead to things like wait and see attitude, where they might say, in my neighborhood I don't feel any effect of climate change, so I'll just wait and see what happens. Okay, so you have to be careful of those sorts of details. So here is the metaphor. We have our hands on the thermostat that will control climate of our children and grandchildren. There are many details. Why do people not worry so much about grandchildren when it comes to the environment, but worry about providing them wealth, for example? Okay, so here are the projections for future warmings. 2040 to 2065 in different scenarios, so RCP 2.6, 4.5, 6, and 8.5, and this is for a further horizon 2081 to 2100. And I think some are temperatures, and this is temperature. One of them should be rainfall, I think. Why am I getting wrong here? No, sorry, this is 2181 to 2100 and this is 2081 to 2100. All are temperatures for different projection, different scenarios, okay? So if you're trying to convince policymakers and decision makers about what will happen in 2081 to 2100, depending on what we do now, it's not very easy sell. Who makes decisions that far in advance? Well, turns out that military establishments do. They don't wait for building a new port to see what the sea level projection is. They just want to be prepared for the best protection they can have. So even if the projection is for 2 meters of sea level rise, it may ultimately be decided by how much budget they can get to build a new port in terms of elevating it enough to protect against sea level rise. So you can see there is the climate change science, which has its own uncertainties, but there are projections which have scenario uncertainties, what will happen in the future in terms of policies and technology and choices and governance and so on. And then there is the financial constraints as well. So we have to combine those. When we communicate climate change science, we have to be aware that those factors are also involved in decision making. Okay? Overall, not an easy problem, but as long as you are solid in your core principles and beliefs and science knowledge and your purpose, you should be a good communicator.